This is Warren Vanderhill interviewing Al Soforenko, Muncie Jewish Oral History Project 2, and the date is January 28, 2003. Al, I'd like to begin, as I have with all the participants in this study, by asking you if you could tell me a little bit about why you decided to come to this area, and if you may have had other options in your life at that point.
Well, I came to Muncie because I was living in Newcastle.
Oh, okay.
We moved from Ohio. I started a company in Indiana.
Okay.
I gave up the academic and what other work I was doing, and I started a company. The company opened up in Newcastle.
Okay.
So the office is in Newcastle. So I bought a house in Newcastle. And then my wife moved over and so on and so forth, and we found that Newcastle was a place we really didn't want to live.
Okay.
So Muncie had a mall.
Oh, okay.
And then Woodland Trails opened up.
Oh, okay.
So we built a house in Woodland Trails.
You mentioned in previous conversations we've had about your academic background. Could you talk a little bit about that for a few minutes?
I got a bachelor's degree from the University of Rhode Island, master's from UConn, and then a PhD in clinical psych from Ohio State. And then I went off to Wisconsin and taught at the University of Wisconsin, and I had jobs in mental health at the same time. I was doing all sorts of stuff. And then I went to Hartford, Connecticut to open up a center for disabled adults with the state mental health department, and taught at UConn at the same time. And then Central State College in Connecticut and so on and so forth.
Okay. When you first came to this area, with that kind of background in places like Wisconsin and Connecticut, Ohio, what did you think of this area? What did you think of Muncie or Newcastle? I can put that in the same context, I guess. Because I'm going to ask you eventually what you think of it now compared to what you thought of it when you first came here.
It was sort of culture shock, I think. It was a little... Newcastle was my first experience to unionism.
Okay.
Because the whole town is based on union this and union that. The car dealers don't want your business unless you belong to the union, so they can give you a slip that gives you $4,000 off. So Muncie is, I don't get that in Muncie, but I'm not that involved in Muncie. The thing that I see in Muncie, though, is that I've never seen anyplace else, is the politics concerns me in Muncie.
Yeah.
Very, very political, and I've never really been exposed to that where I've lived before.
Okay.
But that, again, that doesn't bother me either, because I just avoid it.
Yeah, you're sort of away from it.
Yeah, I keep busy doing stuff.
Yeah. Kind of the story of my life, too. How would you describe your life as a member of Jewish communities in places where you lived before you came here?
I think my wife and I, our involvement was a function of the age of our kids, and we had 5 kids. And our most involvement was when we lived in Connecticut. We belonged to like a 1682 synagogue in Old Wethersfield, Connecticut, on the river. And that was a wonderful experience. But the kids were in Hebrew school every Saturday and so on and so forth. And when we lived in Wisconsin, the same thing. The synagogues were on the other side of campus. And we lived in Sun Prairie, so every Friday and Saturday we'd schlep kids through town to the synagogue, and I think 2 were confirmed or bar mitzvah there, and 2 were bar mitzvah in Connecticut. I think it's a function of the children at the time and the age. Now we're getting more involved. I think we're back to the age, but it's our age.
Okay. Well, were those Reformed congregations?
The one in Wethersfield was sort of Reformed, but I think it was conservative.
Okay.
It was not Orthodox.
Okay.
I was brought up Orthodox.
Okay. Where?
In Massachusetts, in a small little town south of Boston.
Okay.
And in those days, in the 40s, and it ended around the 50s, families would open up their own synagogue. We went to the Silver. There was a Silver family. We went to the Silvers show that they had behind their house.
Oh. Huh.
And then we went to another show in Millis. There was another.
I'm going to have you spell show for the person transcribing it.
S-H-U-L.
S-H-U-L?
Yes.
Okay.
But 10 miles away, there was the Petnov, P-E-T-O-N-O-V family synagogue. It was different. There wasn't any. In small towns in New England, they were family-oriented.
Huh. Well, obviously that's a great contrast to what you experienced when you came here. So I'd like to have you talk a little bit about what your involvement has been like in Temple Bethel since you've been involved with this congregation.
Well, as I say, just recently, my wife and I go frequently. Just recently, I got more involved with the board and the administration of the synagogue, which I enjoy. But the Jewish population in Muncie is so small and so spread, and it goes from one extreme to the other extreme. It's hard to find a place, and if you're a little insecure about it, like my wife is, she prefers not to really get involved to the extent that I'm involved. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I think
she's afraid that something will come up that she won't even recognize or know. Or
okay. A little more specific question. At this point in your life, how important is your affiliation with Temple Bethel?
I think it is important. I think the one thing I'm running into, which maybe it's a me thing, there is no Jewish cemetery in Muncie. And for some reason that has become important to me.
Sure.
So there's one in Columbus, and we purchased a place here in Muncie, but there is no hallowed ground Jewish synagogue. So we didn't release the land over in Columbus. You follow?
Well, I do, because it's part of the aging process. It's part of what one thinks about.
Now, if you go to the cemetery, it's on Kilgore, Beach Grove. Right. There is a Jewish section, but it's not a cemetery in itself. Okay. As Larry told me one day, it's not a hallowed ground cemetery.
Okay. In the first study that I did with one of my colleagues at Ball State 23 years ago, we asked each of the people who participated at that time if they would comment on relationships in this local area between Jewish people and non-Jewish people. And that was a real issue 23 years ago, because there were housing covenants and there were clubs that people couldn't belong to. And so in this study, I'm asking the participants the same question to see if you think that that's really much of an issue as you've experienced it since you've been in Newcastle and more recently in Yorktown.
Honestly, to me it isn't. But as I sit at board meetings, I find out it is.
Okay.
But I've spent my entire life in a Christian world.
Okay.
You follow? So that really, now people may be talking behind me or talking above me. I don't know. But I do pick that up at the board, that there is a real problem, and letters to the editor that people take issue with, and on and on and on. To me, I don't see any problem.
Okay, well, that leads to the second question, which is a more specific one, and that is, in your life, both elsewhere and here, have you experienced any overt or covert anti-Semitism?
I don't believe so. When I was younger, I did. When I was in high school, I did. In a very small New England town, mainly Italian Catholic.
Okay. Kind of reminds me of like the area I grew up in, New York City.
The reason they liked me was because I played baseball for the CYO. Other than that, I was the jerk that went to the Pecknob Synagogue or the Silver Synagogue.
Well, it's funny you mention athletics, and I think in my own experience that athletics in cities is a great leveler, and that you have people who are playing any kind of athletic contest, whether it's baseball or basketball or football, and you've got ethnic Catholic kids and Jewish kids and Protestant kids, and if you can play the game, you can play the game, and that tends to level out a lot of what you're talking about.
It's interesting, and as an aside up to the covert overt kind of feeling, I never really knew, and I'm 72, and this is sort of naive, till I got on the chat rooms in the past month or two about this whole Iraqi, Israeli, Palestinian.
Sure.
A lot of hate out there for Jews.
Tremendous amount.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's right.
I just sit there. I just click it off.
Yeah.
Rather than there's no arguing about it. There's nothing to do about it. But hate.
This is hate with a capital H, which is really tragic, I think.
It is, but I never picked it up in my own life.
Yeah.
Maybe it was university settings. I don't know, maybe...
I think some in university settings, but probably more, from my own experience, at institutions where there are larger Jewish populations, larger international populations. I mean, you certainly didn't pick it up very much at a place like Ball State.
No, you don't.
But you could say that about protest movements in the 1960s and 70s. I mean, we joke a lot around here about the fact that there was the Muncie 7, and what I mean by that, the same 7 students and faculty protested everything, but it might have been, housing codes or the bombing of Cambodia, the war.
Of course, I was in Wisconsin when that took place.
Well, that was real protest.
But I don't think that had a Jewish bent or an Italian bent or any kind of a bent.
Well, it certainly does today.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's really kind of a virulent hatred. How do you see the future of Temple Beth-El?
I think that the lifeblood of a synagogue is the children. And I think without a large number of children moving through the system, it's just going to limp along. I don't mean limp negatively. I mean it's just going to status quo it.
Right.
And now my son has 3 boys, and I'm trying like hell to get him involved. But because of the nature of the size of the synagogue, the things it does not offer that he may want, I'm having a problem.
Does he affiliate with any congregation?
No.
Okay, so he's part of the great unchurched.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I don't see any large numbers of kids. They do a good job of what they do.
Right.
With the people who are involved in leadership positions.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to grow or do anything.
But the numbers just aren't there.
The numbers aren't there. Because with like us, when we brought up our 5 kids, we went to the synagogue religiously. Number one, the rabbi said, you better be here, the kid won't get bar mitzvah, whatever that means. Yeah. But we followed the 5 kids through wherever we were. We'd immediately joined the synagogue.
That's true. I've found in these interviews with a lot of people in the congregation that the children being raised in a congregation and being bar mitzvah or bar mitzvah is really important to them.
Well, I had a daughter Cheryl married Mitchell, and the Queen's nuclear scientist. Anyway, it's sort of a family joke. And they had 2 kids, and they lived in Portland, Connecticut. Who worked for Northeast Utilities, and that's sort of a Jewish no man's land up there. Yeah. And they about 5 years ago moved just south of Boca Raton. For the kids are teenagers now, 12 and 13, specifically to give them a Jewish life. Yeah. And so they go to Jewish schools. They have Jewish holidays off. The whole school shuts down. Yeah. It's the Boca Raton mentality, and they love it down there. But they made that choice. We're going to get out of here, and we're going to pick a place where there's shul and blah, and everything's Jewish. The school is Jewish. The students are Jewish. The camp is Jewish. Yeah. And that's their choice. That's the choice they made.
How important to the future of Temple Beth-El do you think that the building edition is?
Excuse me?
How important to the future of Temple Beth-El do you think the building edition is?
I think it's necessary. I think it's used more, in a general sense than the original core building itself. I think it's important.
Okay. I've asked each of the participants in this study to give me a kind of wish list. And if there were to be an Al Soforenko wish list that might ensure the future of Temple Beth-El, what kinds of things would you put on your list? Now, I'll give you a hint, because this is the place in my interviews where I usually get, well, we really need to have a full-time rabbi. And given your experiences in various Jewish communities, I guess I'll ask you specifically how important you think that is to the future of the congregation.
I think it's very important. I'm surprised that I notice there's a lot of Hillel activity now.
Yeah, Sherry Cross has really done a lot with that.
Yes, she has, and I'm surprised there hasn't been some link between the university, Hillel, whatever, and the synagogue to get a full-time rabbi, to share a full-time rabbi. Okay. That's another thing my wife talks about. She wishes there was a full-time rabbi.
Why do you think that's so important?
Because there's somebody there. There's a person you can go to and say, listen, my dad is sick, my stomach hurts, my wife was nuts, my kids are in court, Or what do you think, Rabbi? Now it's, what do you think, Larry?
Yeah.
And Larry comes close, but he doesn't have that rabbinical glow, that anointment, that safe feeling that I can say to you, the Rabbi, look, my wife's nuts.
Yeah, right.
What do you think? Show me a passage.
Okay.
Well, we don't have that. And I think a rabbi is important for leadership. I think then you grow from there.
So the idea is more, and I know this is a cliche these days, to have someone there who's a spiritual leader 24/7. Someone who's always around you can call on. That's important.
I think so.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd add to your wish list in addition to having a full-time rabbi?
I don't. This is not a wish list. I don't like the location.
Okay.
I think the location is dangerous,
Okay.
especially in these times. Between us guys in the tape recorder, when I sit at a service, I wonder what's coming through the window.
Yeah.
I almost threatened my wife last Yom Kippur to take a gun to be some sort of a hero if the Muslims attack the synagogue. No, but you know, it's
Fend off the invasion.
It's a wonderful place. I mean, it's historical nature.
Yeah.
But I noticed the one we belong to in Columbus now, I just keep getting notices. We still belong because they own the cemetery and all those deals. They're moving out into Dublin, out further out from Columbus to get more space and more room.
Yeah, that's funny because it has so much to do with the financial underpinning of the temple, which, as you know, is always somewhat precarious.
Yes, it is.
And I thought about that in a conversation I had with Marty Schwartz yesterday because, of course, he mentioned that when the Eliades decided that they wanted to make the donation that was responsible for the building addition, that at that point people questioned, well, should we build the addition here? Or should we try to have another location? And I hadn't really thought about that until you brought it up. But yeah, I mean, it's a changing neighborhood as part of downtown Muncie is concerned.
It is, and I don't. It's history. It's a historical piece. I don't know what the hell you do with it. I'm not saying let's demolish the synagogue built in 1810. That would be.
Well, it's like one of the people in his interview with me said, well, you know, I grew up in the Bronx, and I went to a very, very large Reformed temple, Tremont Temple, and it's now a Baptist tabernacle. Well, I mean, I know that in many urban areas, whether it's Protestant churches or Catholic parishes or synagogues, that just because of the changing demographics and the changing mobility patterns of a lot of parts of urban America.
Well, we lived outside of Boston. We lived in an area called Dorchester.
Sure. Yeah,
and we attended the Mishkan Tefillah, which was a temple opposite Franklin Park.
Yeah.
And then all the Jews moved to Mattapan. We went with them.
Yeah.
My dad was a dentist when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
Then we moved to this little town south of Boston, Medway, Massachusetts. And now when you go back, which I haven't, but people who live there tell me, that the black neighborhood, the Dories have moved out, and now Mishkan Tefillah is a black art, whatever, but a huge synagogue.
I'll have to give you a book by a famous urban historian named Sam Bass Warner called Streetcar Suburbs, which talks about that whole pattern of change as the streetcar lines moved out.
Yes, that's
in Boston.
true.
That's what really accounted for the mobility pattern
That's
changing
true.
in that area.
That's true, yeah.
My last question is my working hypothesis that I think I may have talked to you about over a previous coffee, and it goes something like this. If it were not for Ball State University and Ball Memorial Hospital, there might not be much of a future for Temple Bethel. What do you think of that hypothesis? And you know what I'm talking about. I mean, they have become in the past couple of decades largely the importers of the people who come to the congregation. The Ball State faculty who are part of the congregation now, the doctors who come to the hospital who are part of the congregation now. It's a pretty large number of people. And as I looked at the Temple directory for 2002 and for 2003, if you take all those people out of there, there's not much left.
I see, I never realized that.
Okay. Well, you're not part of that group.
No, but I've never realized that group that I see in the synagogue.
Yeah, a lot of MDs and a lot of PhDs.
I know Zentrov and I know Eliades, and that's about it. I didn't realize that they were...
Yeah, it's a pretty big number.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I was struck by it because obviously when I did the first study 23 years ago, the vast majority of people I interviewed were business people. There were a few professional people, but they mostly were people who owned their own businesses. 23 years later, that's certainly not the case. I mean, you're atypical, not typical. And so now what you have are a fairly large number of people who have come from the East Coast, some from around Chicago, a smaller number from the West Coast, And they've been brought here really because of opportunities to be part of the medical community or the academic community. And they happen to be Jewish, and they're now very much involved in the life of the congregation.
Well, but if that being the case, if you look at it this way, then if a stronger a Jewish religious component was in town, you could draw the David Hirsches more.
Yeah.
So
I think so.
You know what I mean? So
yeah, I mean, I go back
on a huge building campaign.
Well, I go back to the point you mentioned about the kids, because I think that a number of people have brought that up, and I certainly agree with that the future of any congregation happens to be the children of the people who are part of the current congregation. Well, when you think now of the university and the hospital and the growth potential of those two institutions as the largest employers in this area, that the future of the temple to some degree has a lot to do with how many people are brought here.
That's correct.
Who might want to become part of temple.
Which comes first? Is there a thriving Jewish community that brings David Hirsch, or does David Hirsch come and Connie Hirsch come and create the thriving community?
Well, I think it's both. And I've had people tell me that they think that if there's a thriving temple, that it makes it easier for the university, for example, and I know much more about than the hospital, to say, okay, we're going to attract Dr. X and Dr. Y, Professor X and Professor Y, because they're Jewish, and one of the things they're going to look for is a congregation that they can affiliate with.
Before my kids moved to Florida, we did a lot of internet investigation to see exactly what was there, and they picked Parkland versus, Cape Coral because Parkland had the more appropriate Jewish school.
Yeah,
that's exactly what professionals do now. Because that's if it's important, that becomes important. They say Muncie, for God's sake, please.
Well, that's a good point, Al, because I've had people tell me that when they were first looking at an academic position here, haven't asked any of the doctors this yet, but in the academic arena, that unquestionably is one of the things that they do. They look in the phone book, they go to the Chamber of Commerce, they try to find out, what opportunities are available. And one of the things that many of them have said to me is, well, we found out there was a temple here, we didn't know much about it, but at least there was one. And so that sort of gave Ball State's job opportunities.
I think what becomes important, I'm this famous surgeon, and I see blah, 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 it doesn't make it crap. It makes it crap to me. Yeah. It's more important that my wife and my little kids have a place to go. Now, I'll guarantee you that if there was a social agenda or a preschool agenda or something going on at this synagogue that my kids go to in Florida, which is impossible, I'd have no problem with my daughter-in-law and my son and their 3 little boys. They'd be there every other Wednesday.
Yeah.
Now they're here on Wednesday morning, and they're at the tennis thing at the Y Wednesday afternoon, and they're searching. Yeah. They're at the developmental thing, the studies, Ball State every Monday morning. But I would that's if the even the Wethersfield Synagogue, which had a huge Jewish children's population, maybe it was Yukon. They opened up the medical school in Farmington and so on and so forth. It just grew leaps and bounds. The place was full every day of the week. I could say to Kay, my daughter-in-law, who loves that kind of thing, now you have an opportunity to take the 3 boys. Now it's not. It's Saturday morning. Yeah. People want more fulfillment than a Friday night and a Saturday morning and 5 holidays a year.
Yeah, and that's what you have now.
It sort of suits me. Yeah. But I can see if you want to attract younger people and keep the synagogue viable long after I'm gone, you're going to have to expand the options.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point to end on, a note of optimism, and I want to thank you very much for participating. Is there anything else that I might not have covered that you'd like to add? I always like to give people a little bit of equal time at the end of the interviews. Anything else that occurs to you that might be of value as far as this project is concerned? Any of the reflections that you might have on the congregation as it is now, or perhaps the future of the congregation?
I really don't, but as I mentioned before, I was brought up in a synagogue where the women sat in the balcony unheated, and we sat downstairs with my dad, of course, at that time, in huge taluses, big black striped ones over the heads. You had to get the lotion going, and nobody understood a thing, at least I didn't. Then Wethersfield was conservative, Wisconsin was conservative, and then you hit here, and there's a push for more English. I mean, that bothers me.
Yeah. It seems.
I mean, after a while, is this a Jewish place, or what is it?
Yeah.
Do you follow?
I do follow because I think that
yarmulkes are optional.
Yeah.
Taluses are optional. Occasionally you see one or two, and I wonder whether the one or two, Dr. Zemstov from Russia, very, very Jewish in a sense. He and his wife and kids, all, and he always dresses that way. I just wonder that there was. Why don't you turn this off for a second? I don't really. I don't know. I've never been. Touched with a feeling that there was any major anti-Semitism around. Am I strange?
No, I think that
because
it really
of the communities that I've lived in, I've never looked for it.
Yeah, I think it's part of it. I think that in now having done about almost a dozen and a half of these interviews, what I've found is that probably the majority of people have the same reaction to that question that you have given to me. There are some that have had some pretty overt examples in their lives of
But it does come up at the board meetings.
Oh, I know.
A letter to the editor will cork half a dozen people off.
Yeah. And I know that our mutual friend David Cameron is good at answering the letters.
It's so cool. He's a cool guy.
Yeah.
When I got my bachelor's degree at Rhode Island in '54, the first teaching job I took was in a small town north of Columbus, Ohio, Milford Center. And there wasn't any place to stay. It was a rural school. So I got a room with a family named Vance, Mr. and Mrs. Vance, nice older people. And old Clarence Vance used to tell me, an old guy, used to tell me that people, if I saw people walking by his house, they wanted to see the Jew. I'll never forget that. Old Clarence said, Albert, he said, I don't want, we love you, there's no problem with Christians.
Yeah.
But if you do see people turning the corner, it's a very small town, not as big as this, that they've never seen a Jew. Now there's a Jew teacher in the high school at Milford Center, Ohio, in 1954. So that was my, and I never took it as, I tell that story because I thought it was funny at the time. And the superintendent lived across the street from me, and I told him the story, and he'd say, well, they haven't gone off to Ohio State yet. This town doesn't go anywhere. He said, at least I know what Jews are. I went to Ohio State.
I was going to say, if they go up to Ohio State, they discover there's a much bigger world.
That's right. But
outside of small town Ohio.
That's right, Milford Center, Ohio. But they're just people who think you might come to the window or something. But I never, since that time, I've had no problem.
Well, thank you very much for participating in my study.
This is great.
I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, anytime.